Welcome back to the Accounting Working Group podcast. I'm your host, Stein Smith, and I'm thrilled to be kicking off 2024, our first episode of this new year with Pat White, who I've had the privilege of having on the podcast previously. So I'm really happy to have him back on the show again. Pat, awesome to have you back, my friend.
Sean, it is just so good. It's good to hear your voice, man. It's been a hot minute. I think the last time we saw you was one of the either WSBA meetings or maybe one of the AICPA meetings or something like that. I mean, it's been a hot minute, man. So it's good to hear
Been a
your
lot.
voice.
Absolutely, Pat, absolutely. And to catch up our audience who might not know you or have met you in the past, could you give us just a quick background on yourself and your firm?
Of course. My name is Pat White, and I'm CEO of Bitwave. Bitwave is the leading digital asset finance platform. And what that means is we have an entire, the way we sort of look at the world is that when you as a business get into crypto, when you bring crypto on your balance sheet, you have a whole bunch of problems that happen because of that. And we have a solution for all of them. So everything from accounting to tax to FP&A, financial operations, bill pay, invoicing now, and treasury management, you name it. If you are a business using crypto, you need Bitwave.
All right. And so all of that really does tie quite nicely into our first topic today, Pat. Obviously, over the last probably 4 or 5 years, this forthcoming Bitcoin ETF has been on the horizon, had faced a whole bunch of obstacles out of the SEC, and then finally, just in 2024, all of the spot ETF applications were approved for trading here in the US, which I think is a great thing. But
Yep.
on a operational point of view, right, both for Bitcoin as an asset class and for those institutions now either directly or indirectly having some exposure to crypto, um, uh, what does this mean?
Yeah, I mean it's funny you say. I mean, this has been on the horizon for like 10 years. I mean, there have been discussions about Bitcoin ETF since maybe like a year and a half or 2 years after Bitcoin came out, only because
Mhm.
it was, Bitcoin still is not the thing that your grandma can pick up and use. So as long as your grandma can't do it, then that's when you still want to have something like an ETF to be able to give your grandparents exposure to Bitcoin. I'm not sure your grandparents should have exposure to Bitcoin, but that is
That's a
a
whole other
separate issue.
conversation, Pat.
Whole
Yeah.
other conversation. And so yeah, the floodgates open. All these guys that come in. We have a lot of good prior art here. So I said, let me actually rephrase that. We have good prior art in terms of how custodians think about monitoring and reporting on their assets. We have very bad prior art in terms of, crypto is not like other assets. It's a lot closer to a commodity than it would be to a traditional ETF, like you would have a S&P 500 ETF. Because the S&P 500 ETFs, obviously, that's all going to be custodied through DGCC. So you're not really worried about custody in that traditional sense. You're not really worried about reporting. Reporting's all highly standardized across the traditional asset space. It gets more complicated when you move from, S&P 500 to international ETFs. So, people holding positions across a bunch of different exchanges. You start to sneak a little bit closer to what it feels like to be a crypto, to be running a crypto ETF. Although we'll talk about how it's a little bit different because they actually really did standardize quite well on Coinbase, which is a custodian. But bear with me here. So you have international ETF, international stock portfolio ETFs that would be buying stock in. They'll be buying stock in companies in India and Thailand and Vietnam, and they'd be obviously holding that stock in exchanges that were not quite as regulated
Mhm.
as the American clearinghouses. And then sort of the next step down that would be something like GLD, which is gold, and obviously they're going to be holding their gold either probably most likely not the business that actually set up the ETF. They're going to be contracting with someone, or they're going to be using one of the commodities hedging places. So after you get through all of those, you get to crypto, where it's now a totally new ball game because there's a bunch of different places they could potentially be custodying their assets. The reporting from those places incredibly not standardized. Like we work with Coinbase Prime all the time and love them to death. But their reporting is just not particularly standardized, and it's not what you would get out of like a clearinghouse. It's not what you get out of the DGCC. Not even close. So you're already running this thing of like you as a custodian of you as a company running a Bitcoin ETF. First and foremost, you have to make decisions about where you're going to store it. And it's actually, Sean, did you see that part of it where they released where everyone where what custodian every one of the ETFs was actually using?
Uh, I would say that probably the only data that I saw on that was that I believe Coinbase had 8 out of 11, right?
I think it was even I think it was 10 out of 11 was
Okay.
Coinbase, and then one was, I believe, internal, like maybe it was Fidelity or one of the other
Hmm.
ones. I'll have to remember, but one of them had an internal solution or something like that. But it was Coinbase basically won some sort of game, and they got everybody on their platform as the custodian. Um, so you're now in the situation where they have to figure out how they're going to be handling the accounting reporting from their side. Uh, Fortunately, they're only doing it on one. If they're all using one custodian, that will make life a little bit easier.
Hmm.
But if they really move to a world where they start arbitraging fees and stuff like that, you can imagine a world where they are trading on a lot of different platforms, potentially holding crypto in a lot of different places, and actually have to do, they have to release their raw holdings, like the underlying asset holdings that represent the ETF that you are buying into.
Hmm.
They have
Hmm.
to release that, and they have to calculate on a day-to-day basis, because that's part of the whole thing with ETFs is you are, on a day-to-day basis, you're either buying or selling based on the price movements for that day, to balance your books with where the ETF has gone. So there's a lot of complexity in both how you're rolling up across, a single custodian, multiple custodians, and multiple exchanges. And then, one thing that people have been talking about that I find so interesting, it's gotten talked about a little bit, but maybe not as much as I think it deserves, is, there is ETFs are traditionally very, very arbitrageable. It's one of the ways that, actually, if you read, Michael Lewis the Michael Lewis SBF book,
Hmm.
one of the things that SBF got his start on was actually ETF ARB. It was, international ETF ARB at, Jane Street. And ETF ARB in those worlds it's tough. I mean, it's one of those things, like, if you have a market that's open for 8 hours, and you have this weird time shifting, you certainly get a early peek into you get a little peek into the future. Like, what's going to
Hmm.
happen to the ETF the minute the market's open, because a market's already been trading the underlying assets for a while. But crypto is now, it's just so funny to think about a world where we have this instrument that, at 4 p.m. on Friday afternoon, stops trading. And, like, man, tell me about the different things that have happened over the weekend that have moved the price of Bitcoin $10,000, $20,000. And it's not like the end of the world, but it's something that the traditional market's not particularly well. It's not they're not well suited to deal with. Like, we know how arbitrage works. Like, we
Hmm.
know that
Correct.
like a bunch of orders get stacked up on it, but it's not fair, right? Like, there's underlying issues with that, which is that the people who have Bitcoin in their IRA are kind of getting hosed, because they are not the ones who would be able to actually sell because of a major movement over the weekend. They would have to be waiting until it happens. So it's an interesting time across the board. There's a lot of stuff to be figured out. It's interesting seeing this mesh between traditional TradFi and this Web3 world, but it is exciting.
Absolutely right, Pat. And prior to us actually starting our conversation on air here today, the two of us were also joking about how all the Bitcoin bros and all the pro crypto folks out there have been so excited about companies like BlackRock coming into the space. And on the one hand, it's BlackRock, Wisdom Tree, all of these big TradFi names, and having Coinbase basically capture the whole market on the other side of it, on the actual custody side. So in essence, right, Bitcoin has become, or at least the Bitcoin spot ETF asset class has become the polar opposite of what Bitcoin as a concept was built to do. So very
Yeah, so
interesting.
Satoshi is rolling in his grave, or there's four NSA researchers laughing hysterically. I don't know, something somewhere is happening right now that is from all this. It
Someone's
is
having a
it
pretty
is
good laugh.
truly bizarre, though. Like, it's how excited crypto Twitter was about,
Yeah.
traditional finance. I didn't think I'd ever see it.
Yeah. No, and to just add some extra background here, as of today, and in our recording date is the fourth day of these instruments trading. Trading volume, as per the block, has exceeded $11 billion
That's
for
incredible.
all of these instruments, which for a ETF product launch is tremendous. It blows everything else out of the water.
Yeah, that is
There's
incredible. I mean, it's it was the comments from the SEC administrator that kind of came out and saying, it was our fault for doing this. Like, why in the world do we wait for 5 years and create all this buzz when in fact we could have just like if we just released this 5 years ago, it would have been a complete a nothing burger. No one would have cared. It would have been a non-story. But instead, we just turned this into the biggest, the biggest hullabaloo. This is Commissioner Hester Pierce, the
mm-hmm,
biggest
mm-hmm.
hullabaloo you possibly could because of all of the controversy. And it's
Yeah.
such a silly. It's so silly for the controversy because I still so I get hung up on this that like for me, I'm not I've never worked in politics itself. I take a
Mm-hmm,
passing I like politics. It's fun to watch and all that kind of stuff. And I look at these agencies, even today, the SEC move here was so weird because it just they're fighting this internal battle with themselves and they're fighting this internal battle with other government agencies where for all intents and purposes this shouldn't have been an issue. Like Bitcoin is treated as a commodity by the commodities and by the commodities board. It's traded on the CME. It is treated as a commodity. There have been legal court cases that have treated as a commodity. So the idea of not being able to create an ETF for a commodity and dragging their feet on it was so weird. But it all comes back to this weird fight over that gray area between the commodities board, the SEC, the FTC, the Consumer Protection Bureau, like all these guys. No one really wants the line in the sand to be drawn. They all
mm-hmm.
want the gray area so they all can try to enforce it. And so even with these guys, they just never accepted this was a commodity, and then they just get kind of nudged into it. I don't know. It's the whole thing is weird.
Yes, yes, and it really does you sort of strike me as a case where everybody, and by everybody I mean the agencies and the politicians and policymakers, benefit from having quite a bit of ambiguity out there,
Yeah.
as opposed to who's in charge of what, and more importantly, who's on the hook for things when it goes wrong, right?
Yep.
And so yeah, but overall, I would say the ETF news is good news for adding transparency and more understandability, right? Going back to your point earlier, Pat, if you are only focusing on sort of the niche crypto native people, folks like us and our audience here on the podcast, that is cutting out about 90% of the market. And so having more TradFi products out there and hopefully better transparency and uh, understandability as a direct byproduct of that is good for the space overall.
I think so. And I mean, it's good for access because
Yeah.
I'm not joking about my grandma. I mean, like there's just no world where she could have Bitcoin in any format. I mean, maybe because like you think about the different ways you get Bitcoin right now, you can
Yep.
get them from neobank apps.
Mm-hmm.
So my grandma definitely doesn't use Robinhood. She doesn't use Simply or whatever it is. You could get it from you could go onto a crypto exchange, you could sell drugs for it and trade drugs in a parking lot for crypto. I think my
Yeah.
grandma's probably not doing that.
Probably not.
Uh and so this is sort of the last thing where like now she actually could open up her TD Ameritrade, go into her IRA and click the button and get it. So it's I mean it's a great thing. It's a tremendous ability for it's a tremendous way for people to hedge against inflation, which is what Bitcoin's always been about.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great. I mean, I think we're all really excited about that piece of it.
I know that I am for sure. So on the other hand, Pat, and again, it is the midpoint here in January. So for everybody who is in the accounting world, that means that income tax time is almost here. And so, as has been their sort of normal operating mindset, the IRS has continued to make tax compliance just a bit more complicated. And
Just a little
so,
bit every year.
yeah, yeah,
Just a
yeah, yeah,
little bit every year.
just incrementally, right? Like
It's
the
very
boiling
you
frog.
feel very frog boiling.
Exactly, boiling the frog style. And so, I'm really interested in your thoughts on this implementation of these changes to IRS code section 6050I, really honing in on Form 8300. But
Yep.
just as a matter of just being as up to date as we can be, there has been information published, and I believe it was in January 15th or January 16th, 2024, where the IRS has apparently come out and said that enforcement of these changes is only going to start once additional guidance has been issued out of the Treasury. Now, I'm not really sure
Oh,
how that's
I
going.
missed that. That's
Yeah,
interesting. Wow.
yeah, yeah. I just caught that yesterday. So, so I'm not quite sure how that's going to play out. But overall, these changes, as written, are going to take effect. And don't forget, they all are going to, I would almost guarantee it, be effective as of their original date, right?
Yeah.
12/31/23. And so
Yeah.
I'm curious, Pat, on your thoughts as to really just how this change can be implemented by
Yeah.
entrepreneurs and firms, right? Trying to use crypto.
There's got to be a good analogy here. And I'm kind of racking my brain for it because it's like what there's the the 8300 change was inevitable. Like the day
Mm-hmm.
crypto was invented, it was inevitable that there would eventually be a requirement for anti-money laundering, for the for AML purposes, and then for also income tax purposes that the $10,000 cap, the $10,000 rule would get enforced. It was a hard inevitability, and yet it was also it's also like so incredibly difficult to enforce that, like, I don't know, there's some analogy of an inevitability that is like a meaningless inevitability, like the McRib sandwich coming back. It's inevitable, but does it really matter? It's
Mm-hmm.
one of those funny things. I mean, like, this is like, it's like so much of this kind of stuff is that it creates a burden for good actors, and it literally changes the life not at all of bad actors. So people that don't care about this will continue to send money around the world as much as they want, as fast as they want to do it. That's the beauty of crypto. And then for people that are audited, and that do have to that do want to be good players in the ecosystem, they do want to do all this stuff, they'll start reporting it. I mean, the hardest part about all this is that I ran into this yesterday. We had a we were contracted with a security researcher to do some research for us, and he wanted to get paid with crypto.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even know where he is in the world. It's one of like I think he's somewhere in Europe, but he literally could be anywhere in the entire world from his accent and from his language. So and when I go to ask him for a W-9, like I just didn't get a response back.
That's
So it's
reassuring.
like I guess we're all gonna have to kind of go change our behaviors here. We all have to now start asking for W-9s ahead of time, or we have to start asking for corporate tins ahead of time, and all that kind of stuff. It's gonna be a real adjustment period. It's gonna have incredibly low adherence, I think, from retail users. Just like tax reporting for a very long time as a pretty low actual adherence from retail users. This will have a low adherence. It just makes this a little bit more complicated. Um, it's yeah. I don't love it. Like, I mean, I get, but again, it was inevitable. So I don't know. Like, it's tilting at windmills to think it's a bad idea if it was never going to happen. But it just shows such a fundamental misunderstanding of crypto in so many
Mm-hmm.
ways.
Yeah, and as an aside, we've included boiling the frog and tilting at windows in
We're
the
really
same
hitting all the
windmills, yeah, in the same podcast. So I'm pretty amped about that, Pat.
yeah,
But
we're tilting at frogs or boiling windmills here.
exactly. We're doing something here, sir. Um, and to echo on that last point you made, right, about having rules on the books is one thing. Having taxpayers, be they individuals or entrepreneurs, comply with them is a whole other thing.
Right.
And then ultimately having the agencies or the IRS, right, having the capabilities and the tools to enforce the rules as they are written. Again, all of that goes back to this continuing ambiguity, right, as to who's in charge of what. Are is it going to be enforced? How is it going to be enforced? And then how likely is it that by accident or not, if a taxpayer is not in compliance, of the IRS catching,
Yeah.
right? So all of that, to your point, all that does is just increase the headaches and the compliance issues for actors who are on the up and up.
Yeah.
And to just add some extra uh, uh, context, as far as the most recent data that I've seen, about 50 million U.S. taxpayers own crypto assets. But as of, I believe it's 2022, the IRS only received 1 million tax returns that indicated
So
crypto
two
trading
percent
activity.
two
Yeah,
percent adherence rate. Yeah, that's about
yeah,
right. That sounds like America right there.
yeah. So and so this whole consternation about either 60/50 I or 60/45 coming into effect next year. All of that, Pat, I think is on the one hand going to be a compliance issue, but it's also going to create opportunities, right, for companies like yours who really, exist to help businesses use crypto and to do so in a transparent and compliant way.
Oh yeah, I mean we're already getting requests for report an 80 like a 8300 report that basically just gives you all the transactions that are over this, and then gives you the ammunition to go and start hunting down the people that gather tins and all the things you're going to need at this point to do it. So it's I mean yeah, I always do try to balance my love of crypto with my love of my company, because there is stuff that's good for my company is not always great for crypto and vice versa. And that's it's one of those funny things like the more reporting requirements, the more this is the FASB change is a great example of that. Like, I think everyone was so excited for the FASB change that it's a little bit dog catching a car kind of thing. Like the FASB change adds a lot of complexity to accounting rules for crypto. We built a whole separate module that goes in that allows you to basically have really complex inventory, like segregate your wallets into separate inventories to any level of detail, and then on inventory by inventory basis set up what rules you want to run, what revaluation rules you want to run, and on a asset by asset basis then calculate those rules. So we have customers that are still using impairment, but then for the 10 assets that they can get approval from their auditor are moving those to use fair market valuation. So it's not like we got rid of impairment, we added in FMV. It's actually that much worse. And then the worst part is the explicit treatment of WETH. Like most of our customers were treating them as essentially equivalent. And I will say a lot of people are still taking that stance. Like a lot of folks are still taking the stance that ETH and WETH are essentially equivalent from a materiality standpoint, and they are not really following that component of the FASB guidance. I'm not a CPA, so I couldn't tell you where they, what kind of guidance they give and all that kind of stuff. But it is everything with crypto. It's every time new regulation or new guidance is released, it does tend to actually make things a little bit more complicated before they get simpler. So we're in that phase right now.
Yeah. No, and excellent points there, Pat. And I probably should have started our conversation with this, that everything said on this podcast is only our own personal points of view, not the points of view of our companies or any other group. Um, but to wrap up our conversation, Pat, right? Because I could have you on here 4 hours, talking about all things crypto. But for the sake of our listeners, I'm going to sort of, wrap up our conversation here for now. And I know it's still early in 2024, but if I had to ask you for two predictions for the rest of 2024 for crypto assets, what are those predictions going to be?
I think last time Sean was on here, I think you asked me this also, and I think I predicted $100,000 Bitcoin. I'm not going to make
Yeah.
that mistake again. Never doing that again. The big prediction. So I've been thinking about this a lot because I've been getting this question. My first prediction is, which is it's a little bit flip, but I think it'll be kind of fun. I think we're going to see a like this is not a ground shattering, earth
Mhm.
shattering prediction, but I am very excited for when we see a Fidelity Bitcoin ad. Like, and I
Okay.
swear to God, it'll happen this year. Like, we will see a Bitcoin ad from a major financial TradFi player, and it's not that this is like the end of the world. It's not like this is going to change our lives. It's just going to be really funny and very full circle. Very very full circle feeling. Like, wow, things have come full circle in this world when Fidelity or JP Morgan is advertising Bitcoin. So
Yeah.
that's my first prediction is that like maybe even at the Super Bowl this year, we see one of the TradFi companies do a Bitcoin ad, and I'm all for it. Second prediction. Um, Gosh, this is a tough one. I think staking is going to be the big name in the game here. So I think we're going to see more and more staking movement, which is going to be great. So more and more excitement around staking, more and more big movement around staking. That's my again, not very insightful, not earth shattering opinion here, or forecast here.
Hmm. No, and so I know that I for one am now pumped to watch it. An ad during the Super Bowl featuring Larry Fink and Jamie Dimon arguing about Bitcoin during halftime. That would be the real holy grail of all TradFi ads right there. but uh, but Pat, as always, an absolute blast having you on the podcast. We'll definitely have you on again, hopefully during 2024 for a update on how things are going and also sort of how the market is going forward. But Pat White, CEO and co-founder of Bitwave, it as always an absolute blast having you.
Oh, Sean's always good, man. Hopefully, hope you get out to the West Coast here at some point, buddy. It'd be good to see you in real life, face to face, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll make it out there. All right, Pat. Thanks again.
Thanks so much, everybody.